Welcome to On the Chain. This is Jeff here with co-host Chip. There he is. We have a real special guest with us tonight, Congressman Warren Davidson, the primary sponsor of the Token Taxonomy Act. Congressman, it's great having you with us tonight.
It's definitely an honor to join you. I love some of the coverage you've given to Token Taxonomy Act and frankly to the whole space. So really an honor to be invited to join you all.
We really appreciate it. And, I wanted to go over, just kind of give a little bit of your background because, most probably don't know, where you've come from, everything that you've gone through to get into actually representing the people in Congress at this point. But you do represent Ohio's 8th Congressional District. And you are a member of the Financial Services Committee, which is outstanding because it just so happens that the Token Taxonomy Act is sitting in the Financial Services Committee. So that's great. You actually enlisted in the Army right after high school. You had the chance to be part of the 3rd Infantry Division, and looks like you went to West Point, graduated top of your class. Congrats on that. Amazing career in the military, 75th Ranger Regiment and the 101st Airborne Division. Got your MBA after that at Notre Dame, owned and operated a manufacturing company, and you've been in Congress now since 2016, happily married for 25 years, 2 kids, and you've got a ton going on.
Yeah, look, you look at just my story personally, a guy enlists in the Army after high school and gets a chance to go to West Point, right? You'd say, God bless America. What an amazing country. I mean, it says a lot more about our country than it says about me. Lots of places around the world that wouldn't even be possible, right? So, and the same. I mean, I had gotten out of the military. I, didn't really know what I would do. I thought I would be a career military officer, and looked at all the spaces out there, and I liked manufacturing because it was so heavily people focused, and there was a lot of change going on in the space. And so we basically applied technology to kind of older processes and scaled up our business pretty nicely. And that's what I was doing. Speaker Boehner was my predecessor. So he was, my member of Congress as well as being Speaker of the House. So, when he resigned from both positions. And, kind of immediately all the people that always thought about being in Congress filed. And then that was September of 15. October of 15, I started getting invites to other people's fundraisers. And then in November, a few people stopped in my office to raise money for a different race, not this one. And they said, well, who are you going to back in the congressional race? And I said, I don't know. You guys are the conservative political people. Who's everybody going to get behind? And they just really cracked the joke. They go, well, it'd be great if there was an Army Ranger business guy in the race. And, we laughed because we thought, that's kind of crazy. And so we just laughed. And then we went on with our conversation. I went home and told my wife about the day. And she goes, well, what'd you tell him? I said, well, we laughed because it's crazy. So I told them they're crazy. And she goes, that's not crazy. You'd be great at that. You should call them back. You should totally do it. And then so I was like, let's go over the ways this is really crazy. And she's like, no, this is for our country. Different people need to do it. You should really think about it. So, initially I was like, yeah, whatever. And didn't think about it. But, Thanksgiving, we went and had, as we normally did, Thanksgiving with her family. And a lot of those folks are Union Democrats, and they were talking about who they were going to get behind and everything else. And they were just like, I can't do it. I'm not going to be supportive for Hillary Clinton. And they were talking about the race, and nothing about me even came up. We were just driving back, and they're like, if my brothers are even thinking about voting for a Republican, you should totally look into doing this. She's like, have you done anything? So this filing deadline was December 16th of 2015. And, early December, I finally started to look into it, and we just did it. I was a business to business kind of platform in manufacturing. And so I had an outside business that did marketing, and I asked the lady that did our marketing, I said, she had a small firm, and I said, what do you think? And she put together some estimates as if we were going to launch a product. And she's like, I've never worked on a political campaign. I'm not even a Republican. More of a libertarian. And I said, yeah, that's okay. We'll just do it like a launch a product. And we filed 10 minutes before the deadline, and It turned into a 90-day sprint and won a crazy 15-way race.
It's outstanding. That takes
pretty
a lot.
impressive.
Yeah.
Who was your
Yeah, pretty
sponsor at
crazy.
West Point?
My spot. Oh, well, so I came in as an enlisted guy, right? So
Yeah.
you don't get the same kind of nomination path.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
one of the real joys is now you nominate. And I think, look, we have an all volunteer military, and the caliber of the young people that want to go serve in our military, want to go serve at the service academies. I mean, it's just great, man. We just went through the nomination process, and, we got it looks like we're going to get about 8 or 9 people in this time. We have 37, I think, at some of the academies right now, just from our district. And so, having gone to West Point, it's really cool to see those folks. And I'd say, the other thing is I get to serve on the board at West Point right now. So, anybody would say it's pretty cool to be on the board of your alma mater. So, different path because of that. I think 75 people entered my class from the enlisted background. So, kind of the nomination works differently.
Very cool.
Great.
Jeff,
So
you ready to get this show started?
Yeah. You know what? We didn't even do the intro yet. So
we didn't even do the intro, guys. Let's get this show started and welcome Warren Davidson. Guys, let's go.
Welcome to On the Chain.
There we are. We're back.
And we're back. That was it.
Let's talk about the Token Taxonomy Act, because this is, I think, for the crypto world at large, probably one of the most exciting things, because a lot of times people aren't really that, not everyone's that involved in politics, right? The geopolitical stuff. Jeff and I always, we kind of venture in there, but I want to know kind of what was what fueled you to go off and do this? And I watched the recent an interview where you did on CNBC. You gave this interesting analogy of what a security might look like, and you likened it to what it might be to use Apple iCloud, right? And what if they called that a token? I thought that was kind of an interesting one, especially since I'm an Apple guy. But what was your inspiration for actually going forward with the token taxonomy and actually creating some legislation that would update what had happened in the 1930s?
Yeah, thanks. So, really good question. So, securities law goes back to the, Securities Act in, I think, 1934 and 1940. These are old bills. And the big thing to determine whether something's a security or not is, I think, a 1954 decision, Howey test. So the language is really dated, and they just try to jam everything into fitting that. Well, when I first got into Congress in 2016, just kind of feeling your way out, figuring out, how the place really works, which is an ongoing process. You get onto a committee, I get a bigger committee, I get onto financial services. And you remember 2017, all the ICO market was going on, and I understood this space from my prior experience pretty well. You'd been into crypto for a long time. And I said, predating my time in Congress, and I said, we should really do hearings on this. We couldn't get traction. Well, I'm the new guy, so I can't convene hearings. But by 2018, it was like spring of 2018, I'm like, well, I can't hold a hearing, but I could at least call a meeting. So I want to get, maybe a dozen, 20 people that really know the space and come together and meet at the Library of Congress. And let's just give them plenty of notice to try to get the word out. So we said, let's come back in September. People will be focused on all kinds of things over the summer. But in September, let's have a meeting. And so the goal went from getting, maybe some representatives of companies in the space or people that really know, from whether they're running exchanges or mining or startups, and, the whole kind of back end piece on the capital side, the venture capital piece. And then if we could get some people that could really understand, custody issues and what's the barrier for, say, mutual funds being able to offer, some sort of crypto product. And so we got some of the people, the feelers out for that, and enough good people started saying yes that, next thing you know, we're getting, the CEO of some of the companies, and they're like, oh, well, if the CEO's coming, we want to send somebody from our VC. And Andreessen Horowitz is coming. Well, maybe NASDAQ could send like general counsel. NASDAQ's got general counsel coming. Oh, maybe like Fidelity and State Street want to send somebody there, like CFOs or general counsels. So once you started getting all that, every startup in the world wanted to come to the thing. And, my goal was to have dialogue. And it's like, well, if we turn it into a big piece, you can only really do lecture format. You can't have dialogue very easily. So we said, well, let's cap it at 50. You can't go higher than 50 and make everyone have any kind of meaningful amount of participation. But we'll have a comment period afterwards and everything. We'll try to stream it and broadcast it and everything. And man, my staff guy was getting calls at like 11 o'clock at night, just people screaming, my CEO has to get in there. So I was like, we're onto something here. This is going to be really good. So we had a good panel of members of Congress that, for Congress understood the issue pretty well to very well. And we had a nice discussion. And, the way I describe it is the goal was to say, if you think about planting a tree, if you think about a tree that goes up and, the trunk of the tree, the base goes up, and then at some point things start to branch out. And, if you're an exchange, you care about this. And if you're, State Street, you care about that. But if you're NASDAQ, you care about some other things. If you're a regulator, you got other issues. But we wanted to go as far up the trunk before the branches started and get what is the least common denominator. So we said, we have to come up with a definition for what is a security and agree on that. So the precise language of it is frankly less important than the fact that we have a bright line test, so that even if the SEC really, really hates you and wants to call it a security, if it's on this side of the test, it's not a security. And even if they really, really love you and say, let's help you. No, if it's on the other side of the test, it's a security. You're just going to do regulatory arbitrage. Nope, you get regulated like a security. So the bright line test was important. We had to deal with custody issues and how do you deal with private keys that you could give to more people. And then, tax issues are still very important. So those are the three main components of the bill. And, we can go deeper about any one of those. But that's how it came. And after that, Darren Soto from Orlando, Democrat, picked up the lead for his side. And we agreed we're only going to put it together if the Democrat wants on, they bring a Republican. If the Republican wants on, they bring a Democrat. Because one of the comments at the meeting was, this isn't really a partisan issue. It really comes down to whether you understand it or not. Now, since then, there are people on both sides of the aisle that really want more government control. And a lot of it's kind of it's more decentralization versus decentralization. The idea that, well, we want to go with the current status quo architecture of a central authority gatekeeper kind of architecture. It's really an architecture question to me. But if you really understand the true security of a distributed ledger, it's an inferior architecture. So it's just hard for a central government to control it, which is kind of the whole point in Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper for Bitcoin. And, to me, that really launches and, symbolizes the space.
Yeah, that's really, it's interesting as you start moving down that path, all the stuff that it took for you to put that together, the fact that so many of these key opinion leaders in the financial space, immediately, latched on to what you guys were working on. We followed you with the first introduction of the Token Taxonomy Act, second introduction, Token Taxonomy Act. Now we're on the third introduction of the Token Taxonomy Act. And we noted the past two times we saw other acts kind of spawn. Now this one, we saw HR 1602 that spawned off in a sense, and moved its way to Senate. But what do you see, and this is, I'm sure everyone's dying to hear this part of it. It falls into the Financial Services Committee. You have Maxine Waters over there who doesn't seem to even understand how to use her cell phone, let alone the idea behind the digital asset space. But how does that work when you're sitting there, and you have a bill sitting in front of committee? How many of the people in committee actually understand what it all represents financially and technologically?
Well, so here's the thing. In the private sector, if you work for a company like that and you have, a great legacy company and they just don't get your idea, you just leave and start it, right? You got to launch a startup, and so many good companies have started that way. I mean, I think about just popped into my head right in your question. Garmin was at Honeywell. Honeywell could have owned Garmin, and they don't, because some folks couldn't get any traction with their management team. And Honeywell's a pretty forward-thinking company. They don't miss epically like that very often, but some of their key engineers left, started Garmin, scaled the heck out of it, and did really well. So in Congress, Well, you can't do that. You're just stuck. So change is hard and anywhere, but in Congress, it's very hard. One of the things I say is Congress is really good at preserving the status quo, which is a very polite way of saying we don't really get much done. And yeah, that's kind of not a partisan thing. I mean, it kind of breaks that way on both sides. Now, in this case, not so much because of their political affiliation, maybe part of it's generational, but, Patrick McHenry is the Republican ranker. He really understands the space. I mean, in fact, on our committee, he probably is the next person along with me that really gets it. And frankly, on the Republican side of the aisle, you go all the way up to Kevin McCarthy, our leader of our conference. He also gets the space pretty well. So that bodes really well for legislation like this to move, should we be able to change who's calling the plays. And on the Democratic side of the aisle, although there are Democrats who really understand the space well, their system goes completely on seniority, right? So none of the other factors matter. It's all seniority based, which is a simple bright line test. And it has a beauty of its own, I suppose, but it's limiting. And so, for example, Maxine Waters is the chairwoman, and frankly, she's not inherently hostile to this idea, in my opinion. She's not passionate about it, so she works on things she's more passionate about. But the Capital Markets Subcommittee is chaired by Brad Sherman from Los Angeles, who, as it turns out, is one of the most hostile to crypto people in all of Congress. He really thinks crypto is bad. Now, he attacks it by saying the only reason to own any of this is to evade taxes and launder money, to support narco terrorists and everything else. And he says that because it's a straw man argument. There is no pro narco terrorist lobby. There's no pro tax evader lobby, at least officially. And so he attacks an argument that's there. But what he's really after is centralization, the idea that the central government can be there just to keep us safe and spy on all the transactions and we have to create a back door. Well, no, this whole thing works different than that. So you can't just carve out a back door, which is an inherent weakness in the centralized system. So it's an architecture issue. So
I laughed at that.
It's a personality role and who's in the seat.
Gotcha. The reason I laughed when you said you mentioned Sherman is because Jeff has an affectionate name for him, and we one time blurted out. We thought about that at exactly the same time because it's like he calls him. What do you call him, Jeff?
The Shermanator.
The Shermanator. So it's like
it was
like
one of the streams.
So it was like one of the streams, and that kind of just stuck. So anytime his name came up, obviously, that would be part of it. Does something like this? I understand Maxine Waters. Obviously, she wants to work with things, and she really puts, just like anything we do in any job, right? It's a job. You go there, you really focus on the things you enjoy, and maybe over here not so much. But given the fact that it's a financial services committee, would it ever come up? Did it ever come up as a conversation where you even just like talk about it? As far as, maybe taking a vote or getting it out of committee. I mean, putting it on the House floor and getting it there for a vote, because we did see a committee put together. We did see the last one come out, and now I think it's sitting in with the Senate right now. But it's like, let's spend a year talking about it and having chips and dip and stuff, and we'll have a few drinks and we'll just discuss it, versus something that's really well thought out, does a great job of updating, the 33 securities and, this whole Howey test. Has it ever come up in a serious discussion of like, let's just see if we can get it out of committee?
Yeah, I mean, it comes up on the Republican side pretty often, but, those are the barriers. Maxine's not, I've met with her. She takes my meetings. We get along, great, even though we're partisan at odds. I'm on the more conservative end of the Republican Party. She's on the more progressive end. I have a much lower media profile than she does. Yeah. But, when you talk to her, I mean, Democrats used to call her Auntie Maxine, and she literally reminds me of one of my best friend's aunts. She's, and then, you're like, oh, well, I just saw her talking about this. If you can set those aside, some of my colleagues can't, then you can have a great conversation with her. If she was your neighbor, most people would get along fine with her, but then she talks politics and you either love her or not. And the pressure really to do stuff on this, look, it's no secret. People spend a lot of money lobbying Congress for a reason. And, it really does. Who gets on your calendar? What topics do you talk about? Which meetings do you take? You want to represent everybody in your district first and foremost. And you would think that in LA, this would be a big issue. But Maxine Waters, part of LA, it's not the biggest issue in her district, right? So she's heavily focused on the issues in her district. Brad Sherman's heavily focused on the issues in his district. They're both in LA. You would think the crypto community in LA would be able to get these guys to come out to some events, understand it, interact with some regular people, not, across the aisle Republicans. Because frankly, that's normally way more persuasive, than a colleague who you disagree with on a number of other issues. So, what Darren and I have been able to do, and I'll give a shout out to Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey. He's been great working on the issue. On the Republican side, we've got Ted Budd from North Carolina and Scott Perry. And that's the current this Congress balanced team. Tulsi Gabbard was on the bill, last Congress from Hawaii.
Right. Yep.
So, there's been a sort of slow intro of bipartisanship in action. Now, the speeches have been good, but the reality is it's been a pretty partisan start to the year. And, so I think that's the big piece. And in Congress, at the end of 2018, we introduced this bill for the first time, Darren and I, and we didn't really push much further out than that because the whole goal was to get comments. We wanted to go public with the work we had. And in September, we met and we thought, by the end of October, we'll introduce some stuff. We'll get some comments. Man, the comments were crazy from everybody, academia, anybody that thought they might have a stake, people that were in the room, people that couldn't get in the room, people that only even heard about the meeting because there was coverage of the meeting. And so we had a lot of input. So we published this at the end of December of a year where the Congress is ending. And then when you come into a new Congress, you have to introduce a new bill. So the whole goal there was we'll get the feedback at the end of December and maybe early February, reintroduce it with the feedback that we got from kind of the public comment period. And we couldn't reintroduce that till I think early April of 2019 because we just had a lot of feedback. And so since then, it hasn't really changed much. We do have some amendments that we think if we could move it through committee, there'd be some amendments that got debated. And, we're all kind of like, okay, if that's what everybody agrees to, we'll get it through committee and just happy to entertain, debate, and amendment. But the first piece, even ahead of getting a markup in a committee, normally is that you notice it for a hearing. And we've had lots of chances to notice this bill for a hearing. I was really optimistic that we were going to get this when Facebook was launching Libra, and we had two good hearings there. That's where I was able to introduce, shitcoin versus Bitcoin into the congressional lexicon. But since then, we haven't been able to really get enough momentum to get the bill noticed. And one of the big things that changed is Brad Sherman became the chairman of the Capital Markets Subcommittee.
It's definitely difficult. So here's some, there's some questions coming in from the audience that I know, people are dying to hear about. And here's one, that is happening right now. And had we had regulatory clarity, had Congress had the opportunity to pass the Token Taxonomy Act in the previous congressional session, maybe we wouldn't be in this position right now. But the SEC did file suit against Ripple with a claim that they sold XRP as an unregistered security dating back to 2012, 2013. Is this coming up in conversation at all? What have you seen, in Congress that might move it one way or the other? I mean,
so it's come up a lot, and frankly, I'm just walk through there's a 4-part test to the bill. So the bill as drafted right now, first it's created, not a promise to create them. So at the time Ripple sold XRP, my understanding is somebody had already created XRP as a ledger, and Ripple was selling something that existed. It was created already. Okay, there's a debate about that, to be fair. But so let's say it's created. It has to be not a promise of a future delivery, and that's a longstanding piece in securities law. It has to be no longer controlled by the creator or a central authority, and it has to be transferable without an intermediary. it's not 100% clear that Ripple's role on how to control any part of XRP as it's structured. So they may exert enough control that even on the test we've proposed, that they wouldn't fall. And this is staying fairly close to the law as it's been, so that it's not completely, giving a pass to people that just want to bypass securities law. So this is the framework that we've got. And then it's stored on an immutable distributed ledger. The way Ripple does their process is, something people talk about, but it is fast. It's a great payment system. So people have conversation about that. And then 4, I think they easily meet, it does not represent a financial interest in a company or entity. And clearly there's now a distinction between XRP, the token, and Ripple, the company. So, that's the test as it is applied. And that would really be the role of the SEC going forward. If they had this, it's like defining the strike zone. The umpire still has to call balls and strikes, but at least you've got a defined strike zone.
Right. Regulation through enforcement, more or less, right? I mean, it almost seems that that's the way it's been. And, with this SEC suit, it's interesting if you're following along with just some of the kind of back and forth, typical stuff that goes back and forth. But it seems to me, though, that the SEC doesn't really have clear guidance to even, they don't even know where the strike zone is, right? The strike zone, it's always been a moving target because all you can do is go to past wins or losses, right? When you go back to some of the IPOs, which really doesn't have anything to do with this. And just a quick question, do you think that today's XRP is a security at all? I mean, do you think it looks like a security, or does it fit some other criteria?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would enjoy a good conversation with the team about where it's at right now. I've talked with them in the past, and if I were at the SEC, I think an audit would make sense to really understand kind of how much control does Ripple have over the ledger, and that's the key. And for me, that's really one of the real breaks between to be polite, and altcoin and Bitcoin as a proxy for something that we know is true distributed ledger. There's no corporate headquarters. There's no place to subpoena or anything. Satoshi's not going to show up if you subpoena him, we think, right? So if you look at Ripple, I think that's the core. Could Ripple serve as a central bank and issue more dollars, diluting the value of all the other existing dollars? I mean, someone asked me, well, it wasn't really me, it was an open question on Twitter, what explains this year's rise in crypto? And in 3 words, and I said, short the dollar. And why is crypto going up? Because for the ones that are viewed as a real store of value, the dollar clearly isn't functioning as a store of value. You're diluting the value of all the other dollars by just creating out of thin air lots of new dollars. There's nobody lending us this money. And I think that's the core issue for any of the things in this space. Just like if a board could issue more shares, they would dilute the value of the existing shareholders. And that's very clear. The shares are securities. And that's the essence, I think, of why central authority is the core question. And I don't know if they can solve that just in dialogue or if they actually need this suit. I've talked to people who are on different sides of that who say that they've, been in the room and drawn their own conclusions. But I think that's going to be the core issue, is how much authority could Ripple exercise over that existing ledger.
It's interesting. So from that, I guess you can segue also then we start looking at the centralization like you're talking about. And obviously seems to be a big push right now across the world, government by government, central bank by central bank, to start rolling out central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. That if we take an example, there seems to be some highlight on what China's doing with the digital yuan, which is 100% centralized and 100% structured in a way that they can track every single thing a person does, plus social score them. Seems a little bit scary and seems a little sci-fi, but it's happening over there. Yet a lot of these other governments want that type of scenario, it seems like, to potentially unfold. What do you see the role of that is, the CBDC in the U.S.? Is that digital dollar based on that possible or not?
Yeah, I think that's really one of the most important questions. And look, if you ask constituents, is a central bank digital currency, your top political concern? I mean, there's no district in America where that's coming back on the scorecard at all, even prompted. Most people aren't going to put that anywhere on a list, right? So, but it's vitally important for the United States. A big part of our national security depends on the U.S. dollar being the global reserve currency. A big part of the way we've been able to get away with ravaging the dollar this past year is because we're the world's reserve currency. I mean, the reality is our debt to GDP ratio right now is as bad as Greece's was in 2008. I mean, this is not healthy balance sheet time for the United States. It's also not healthy balance sheet time for the planet. The last time the planet had this much debt was at the end of World War II. And for people in currency history, that's where the Treaty of Bretton Woods put a new reset to the entire monetary system, and most developed countries went to a gold standard, and that was negotiated in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. That stayed the default with some tweaks till 1971, when Nixon pulled it off and went to pure fiat, or some would say the petrodollar, because by that point we had become the reserve currency, and commodities broadly around the planet are priced in U.S. dollars. So, when you look at the implications for a central bank digital currency, obviously China wants to go to something that makes them less dependent on American financial control, in part just for national security reasons. A big part of how we use sanctions and follow the money all around the world is because we are the reserve currency. Settlement takes place in dollars, which moves money through large U.S. Financial institutions. And we're able to use that leverage to frankly get a peep in behind the curtain. Even it was newsworthy to get into Switzerland, to get into Hong Kong, places that used to have real private banking. There really isn't much private banking anymore, which is part of the inspiration for at least Bitcoin and some of the other private versions, some level of privacy behind the transactions. And I think that's the chance that America has. We have the chance, if we really want to be part of the future. We look at the characteristics of Bitcoin, if we are going to create our own central bank digital currency, follow the same principles that built this country as the land of opportunity. We got the Bill of Rights. We've got freedoms here. We respect privacy, at least officially. But what's happened over the years, going back to the Patriot Act, for example, and even prior to that, is you had this central authority that was going to spy on everybody, just to keep everybody safe officially, right? But so many people have grown accustomed to this kind of surveillance state that it's scary for them and many of my colleagues to go to this true system. And as people that follow this podcast likely know, privacy is not secrecy. I mean, if you really wanted to launder money and evade taxes and fund terrorists, you wouldn't put it on a public distributed ledger. Of course, you would want private keys, but you'd want a lot more privacy than that. And that's not saying none of that happens, but a whole lot more of it happens in cash in the current existing financial system, even through big banks.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time. The fact that the funny thing is, if you're a bank, you fall into that too big to fail sort of category. The other part of it is, as a bank, it's like, well, you laundered $2 billion. Yeah, we didn't really know. It's like, okay, slap on the wrist, get a little bit of a fine, and hey, it starts to sound like a pretty good business plan. When you get a modest little fine right there, but then you see that Bitcoin's been attacked from all sides, right? You got Christine Lagarde coming up from the European Central Bank. You have the Federal Reserve coming out, and everyone's like, it's bad. Then you have the SEC this past week, a couple days ago, issuing their guidance saying, if you're with any ETFs or any funds that have any sort of purview into Bitcoin, be careful because you might lose it all. So this sort of like shock and awe campaign about be careful, be careful. Well, I mean, that's what investors do. I think we're turning into the nanny state everywhere. And I think what's happening, what we're finding out, Jeff and I found out here doing this show, is that the world's waking up. We have people in right now from all over the world that are very interested in what happens with this Ripple case, only because of what the ramifications are. And I think you put it so elegantly that the fact is that if we don't start moving, we're going to miss a huge opportunity. We're already chasing companies away from the U.S. And like you said, look at all of the history here, and look what happened with the internet. And because the internet was free and open, we had a really good chance. Do you see a turn anywhere? Do you see any kind of turn? Because we're seeing it out there with regular people on the street. We, the people, are saying, hey, come on, we're a little bit tired of this. We're going to if we put $1,000 into a cryptocurrency, we put $1,000 in the bank, we get to see that could potentially grow. And wow, I doubled my money. I didn't know that was going to happen. And maybe put a little more. We're seeing this giant influx in 2021 into cryptocurrency. Do you think there's a turn of what's potentially happening over there in Capitol Hill? Do you think that maybe the tide's turning a little bit? Because Dogecoin, because of Saturday Night Live, because of Elon Musk, do you think that like they're watching? I mean, you're sitting home watching Saturday Night Live, having some popcorn. You're watching Elon Musk talk about Dogecoin being a hustle. Look at how he crashed the entire market, saying we're not going to support Bitcoin. Do you think this culture is starting to bubble up a little bit? Do you see that happening?
Look, the market speaks, right? People notice it. And you look at how much crypto has been traded this past year. I think it's like 1.6, 1.7 trillion. I mean, it's dynamic growth rate. Just like, if you look at the growth rate of Ether and Bitcoin over the past year, it's huge. But if you look broadly, Ether since its creation, Bitcoin for the last decade, Bitcoin's been the best performing decade-long asset that the average person could buy. Publicly available, could be bought. And think how much people have missed out in their retirement savings by not being able to put that in a traditional retirement plan. There is no path still a decade on to do this, and that's the fault of the SEC. So a lot of people, when they're looking at, look, we have all the talent in the U.S. We got the best markets for goods, services, intellectual property, capital. I mean, we get less than 5% of the population. We got roughly 25% of the planet's GDP, but we have over 50% of the capital market, invested capital. I mean, God bless them. What an amazing country. Why wouldn't you want to keep that momentum going, right? Mm-hmm. But they're totally blowing it. People, just like you said, Chip, are leaving the United States not to avoid our laws. They're looking to find laws in places like Singapore and places like Switzerland. Heck, in small startup countries, they're looking to be competitive to draw that capital in. And, somebody's going to be, look what Hong Kong was able to do. And they were dynamic, not because they had all this great geography or mass. It's because they created a functioning rule of law that attracted massive capital investments.
Yeah, that's solid. It's interesting. We start looking at this dynamic, and the way that the markets are going right now in the U.S. It seems like they're like you brought up. Why wouldn't we want the good times to continue? But there seems to be a concerted political effort to undermine that type of productivity, that type of entrepreneurship. And, we seem to be chasing that, away from the U.S. I look at cryptocurrency and the digital asset space probably as the best opportunity for entrepreneurship ever in history on a global scale. Even the internet at its height focused most of its wealth creation in Silicon Valley. Now we're seeing companies build up all over the world. But as that's happening, like you were saying, why do we want to chase the best and the brightest away from the U.S. and send them someplace else? So what can be done at this point? We're coming up on a critical election in 2022. But outside of that, what can be done to make sure that we're keeping our best and brightest here in the U.S.?
Well, I think one of the things is there's a lot of invested capital, and there's people that really want to fund startups. So I think, keeping our venture side working and keeping that pipeline available. There are a lot of ideas, and there's a lot of funding available. So funding startups here in the U.S. is a big part of it. And thankfully, so far, a lot of the capital formation hasn't moved offshore. So people have the idea, but then it's really what are they directed to do? Where's the market? I mean, to me, one of the promising technologies is, if you talk so much about cancel culture and identity, you look at people that are, say, undocumented or, don't have a credit history, have no bad credit, good credit, or any other kind of credit. They're just not on the grid for some reason. In Africa, that's a common problem. So, but with a cell phone and an SMS system, you can have access to a distributed ledger, and literally we'll bank you, we'll bank you, we'll bank you. Why? Because the technology makes it possible. And the other thing about tokenization, it's a whole different potential for a capital structure. We have to really get rid of the accredited investor rules and change that. And I think the other thing is, you have people at the SEC that have a lot of power right now. They have a lot of say over where we're headed. And I'm frankly encouraged that, Gary Gensler is a guy that really understands the space. Jay Clayton maybe understood some of the space, but he was not welcoming where it was going. He worked very aggressively, especially between him and Mnuchin at the end of the Trump administration. To me, almost did something that would have been catastrophic for investment in the United States, which is to kill private wallets, private digital wallets, or they called it self-hosted wallets. A lot of these are cold storage wallets that are secure, good ways to do it. And they're worried about, as Sherman likes to say, tax evaders and money launderers when they publish it. But the reality is, it has the essential features of cash, and it has the essential features of a distributed ledger. It cuts out the intermediaries. So if you just want to move the title to, anything, if you want to move the ability to use, say, storage, one of the use cases for a utility token is Filecoin, right? And that's where my analogy on CloudCoin goes. You get a terabyte of storage for X dollars. It's traded essentially as a commodity. If Apple did that, it would be crystal clear. You're not buying shares of Apple, right? You're buying a utility. But somehow it gets obfuscated when somebody else is doing it. So, I think that we have to get this right, and we may not be able to wait till we can move it through Congress. I mean, Hester Peirce has done a great job of communicating this. To some extent, Bill Hinman's, been supportive. And I think there's a team in place that can get it. Gary Gensler was at the CFTC when we got some regulatory clarity for Bitcoin and Ether. And I just hope they get it right. What he's going to run into is an administration with Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell who aren't entirely receptive with it. And it's going to be a battle. So, I think the public comments are really important on right now. One of the things at Treasury is, private wallets. So as they call them, self-hosted wallets. You have to preserve that. And you can't just treat it like, oh, well, we monitor cash transactions this way, so now we're going to put a burden on everybody to do it that way. You don't monitor, everything the same way. And so there's a way to do it within the existing framework. But in the meantime, it shows that when we do get the chance, members of Congress have to be aggressive and ready to start calling some plays because the market really, really needs it. And I fear the consequence. We're losing a lot of ground, especially to China. And if the default architecture shifts to what you were describing, Chip, which is a centralized control where the government spies on you and your transaction only gets cleared if you have the right social credit score, man, look out. That's going to be a scary world. I mean, pick which dystopian future you're in. That's the kind of government that is there. And one of mine is like the Book of Revelation. There's certain people that aren't even allowed to transact because they're not on the authorized list. And I think that's a scary future that's entirely avoidable.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think that the biggest probably obstacle we have, anytime we have new tech, we always use legacy to explain it, right? So, and when the internet came along, we would go back to something else. I mean, how many people out there remember that, Amazon started out as a bookstore. Let's put a bookstore on the internet. Well, they pivoted very quickly to a massive organization. And it was because they had to solve some problems with tech, with their own infrastructure, is how they ended up having, being the leader in the cloud. But again, because we are watching states like Wyoming, right? Wyoming setting the basis for what you want to be. You have Wyoming, and then we have our very own Miami Mayor Suarez down here, who is putting up billboards and trying to attract talent and making a lot of noise. So it's pretty exciting to see that. Of course, we have Darren Soto, who's just stone's throw up here in Orlando, that is a co-sponsor of this bill. So when we look at innovation, you said it, innovation, what bubbles up, what's next. If we don't give the freedom to people to start inventing, this is really almost like the internet 2.0. Maybe it's beyond 2.0, but Jeff said it best with that. This is going to be the greatest wealth creation, transfer of wealth, because there's no social status. Anybody with a phone can buy $5 worth of crypto. Most people don't realize you can buy a partial. People think, I don't have 50-some thousand for a Bitcoin. You don't need $50,000. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts as to where do we go from here? And what do you see us as a nation 5 years down the road? Do we win this battle? Do we become the innovators? Or do companies like Ripple pack up shop and move over to Singapore or Dubai?
Yeah, that's exactly the question. And I'm encouraged because a lot of my colleagues get that. I think a lot more have. And, I've everyone in Congress that's been here any amount of time, whether they're into financial services or not, knows Warren Davidson's talked about Bitcoin in particular for a long time. Well, when I came to Congress, Bitcoin wasn't even $1,000. It's done pretty well since then, right? Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of people who are going, maybe I should have been listening to this guy. So I think the market moving is inherently holding people's attention. So I think that's one of the things, but you can't just wait. You got to keep doing it. I applaud. Look, Caitlin Long has been dynamic, and the legislature in Wyoming has really pushed it with some outside input. Frankly, people that walked away from Wall Street and said, we're going to create this, and they did the work. And they're working to create the right regulatory framework in Florida that's going to be tremendous. Both states, they have great tax environments at the state level. But you can't compete if your federal level is going the wrong way with places like, Singapore and Switzerland that are working to do it. I was really encouraged recently, even though Yellen's had some troubling comments publicly, and so has the Fed, but they're talking about making the Fed open to fintech companies, so you could have overnight deposits there. Now that's playing catch up with the London central bank, but it's something. And so just keep talking. I think get the meetings and just keep making the market move. The market's going to take care of it in that sense. But the presence in terms of taking time to get engaged in this. I mean, everyone knows healthcare spends a lot of money preserving the status quo that's really broken. It's got people so frustrated they want the government to run it, on the one hand. But on the other hand, it clearly is not a free market. I mean, it's really a controlled system. So there's no real competition involved in it. So that's what happens if you just let the status quo sink in. Everything becomes entrenched. And there's a sense that the banks and the central banks together are collectively working to preserve the status quo now. The thing I think everybody's realizing, and I'll probably ask it next week of some of our largest banks and some public CEOs who were very public, trashing the space for a long time, are now creating their own products to be able to invest and hold. No one more iconically than Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase.
That's right. Yeah, that's bringing up banks is so poignant. One of our last interviews about a week ago, we had Alex Mashinsky on with us, CEO of Celsius, and you look at what he's doing to change the fundamentals of individuals being able to save and earn interest. You go to a bank and you're lucky to get 0.25% at the bank, and your money's sitting there and doing nothing. And Alex Mashinsky looks at it and he says, you know what, let's allow people to hold, to hodl their digital assets and make money from it. And here you have a platform. It's changing things. Banks are still holding on to every last bit of profit, and I'm all in favor of profit. But at some point, there's tipping point in technology, and someone's found a better way to give back, to the people that are actually putting their money there. Why not? And so you're seeing, and there's a lot of profit to go around. Celsius is going to be a behemoth. It's going to be one of the greatest titans of our time. And now you look at that, and they're paying great interest. Is there any recognition within Congress, within the Financial Services Committee, of what they're doing to change things? And are you getting any feedback at all from the banks on that?
The banks, not so much, but you talking about Celsius, BlockFi, Caitlin Long's got a company, a couple others are out there in the crypto bank space, and you're right. I mean, if you hold it, you're getting yield that you can't really save, and that goes back to like the whole point of sound money, right? You're looking at the U.S. dollar that's being annihilated by creating more dollars that aren't really borrowed. So there's no market influence on rates. There's no reward for saving. It fuels the system. So the path out of this, the path out of just more government, more control over your life, more freedom, is decentralization. And frankly, it's a distributed thing. I mean, yes, some of the early adopters probably make more than late adopters. That's inherent, but it's not a barrier. I mean, for a lot of these things, you can download the code and start doing it on your own, and you can literally move things without an intermediary. The legacy system is no more iconically dominated by the IRS, the American Internal Revenue Service. And this past year, they put a question. Yeah, if you hadn't filled out your taxes this year, they ask, have you transacted in any crypto this year? I personally am in a role where I think I should probably go ahead and answer the question. But I find the question offensive. I'm not sure it's constitutional, legal, permissible. I'm confident somebody's going to file the lawsuit, and I hope they win, because I don't think they should be able to ask that. And that's one of the most offensive things about the current tax system is not so, yes, we have to fund the government. And, it's just the income system that is out there is way too involved in your privacy. It's like, did you pay somebody this year as an employer? Did somebody pay you? Did you buy or sell something? Did you make or lose money when you bought or sold it? Did somebody give you a gift? Was it too generous? Did you inherit something? Did somebody inherit something from you? This is like worse than going for, a very invasive doctor visit, right? And so I think this kind of system is part of what's attracted people, and it makes folks like Brad Sherman say you're just evading taxes, and it's like, not really. We're just kind of saying, look, get back in your lane, freaking leave me alone. And I'm happy to support my government. I love my country. I've had, frankly, him say that to me. Like, dude, I was an Army Ranger, man. I love this country. I am do anything for this country. But I'm also not going to watch it be destroyed because we cling on to something that can't continue to be. You are not going to be able to ban the internet. Even people in North Korea are getting it, much to the chagrin of their government. And you're not going to be able to ban crypto from moving on a digitized platform. And there are people that are still not yet accepting that reality is where we're at.
It's a great way to say it. I mean, we always talk about this a lot. Decentralization is freedom. Centralization, control, censorship. And, I think one of the questions too is I believe that there's sort of a fear, and I'm talking about all governments, isn't just the US. This whole decentralization idea has everybody freaked out, because what happens, we start tracking, if we want to be invasive, we want to be able to track what Congress is doing, where the bills are going, where the money's going, right? We follow the money and we realize it was distributed. Okay, but where? And if we track it on the blockchain, it's public, right? It should be public because the taxpayers, we should know how is our money working for us and what's not working so well. So the whole idea of decentralization finding its way into government, and when decentralization gets there, would we have to sort of look at things a little bit differently, right? And so, do you think that's a possibility? Do you see that fear now, or do you see Congress not really even looking at that aspect and still attacking it from, well, it's nefarious and And these people are doing bad things. These straw man arguments. Well, which one? Well, we just saw 40 banks just go down with a couple $1 billion fines here. Okay, so.
Yeah, so it's essentially, you can know who makes the argument. The people that are trying to preserve the status quo, whatever reason, it's hard to say what their motives are. You can speculate. They make the argument, oh, this is bad. But I think people that spend any energy on this see the promise of it, and it is going to flourish. I think, look, the Department of Defense has had a hard time passing an audit. They've got a $700+ billion budget a year. And you think of a publicly traded company of that scale or anywhere near it couldn't pass an audit. I mean, they'd be delisted in a heartbeat. The whole board would be fired. People would be going to jail, And if you put their funding on a blockchain, well, that would be great. And you say, wait, we can't really do that because some of the stuff's classified. Great. We got a private blockchain for the classified stuff. And it's a more secure system than the current dominant architecture. And the good thing is MIT's talked a lot about that. Gary Gensler spent some time teaching a publicly available for free class at MIT. So I think he gets the potential of the space. So I'm encouraged that we got maybe the right person on the bus at the right time in the right seat. The question is, you still got to do it. And he's going to have to overcome, let's say he's the biggest champion, ever for this space, right? He's still going to have to overcome a lot of friction. And that's kind of emblematic of the space. That's what decentralized systems do. They overcome friction by getting rid of intermediaries. So, I'm hopeful that we can pull it off because it is really high stakes. And I think it really has a lot to say about what the future of our country is going to be like. Because, as is common, it's common saying in the space, what it predates this is it predates crypto, but change the money, change the world. And that's
a great statement.
It's a big,
go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
It's a big part of where we're at, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that. Change the money, change the world. And that's exactly where we're at right now. One of the obstacles Gensler has to overcome is really his own side of the aisle, his party. There's a lot there that he's going to have to overcome because there's some people that are going to not like, him moving in his own direction. They're going to want to have him, follow the line. Here's one great use of blockchain. Let me know if it's even discussed in Congress at this point. But what about putting our voting into the blockchain and someone taking that initiative, in the U.S. to say, hey, you know what, one person, one vote, and that's it. It's secured. And if you're able to pull that off, it's probably more resistance to that than the financial side.
Yeah, and look, we're going to get there way before we get to voting for elections. We're going to get there with proxies, I think. So I think Travis Laster, I think he's vice chancellor in Delaware, and he had a great paper on this and spoke about it, I think in 2015. So he already saw the potential of this. And so people have worked on it. And look, proxy advisory for how do you vote the shares is dominated by two firms, and they both have very particular agendas. So they steer the entire landscape towards their view. So there'll be, people that want to preserve the status quo. You go, wait, what happened with all these woke boards and everything else? Well, they got control of the proxy advisories. You own shares. The proxy advisory firms vote them. The pension funds own them. So the people that custody the shares, have a massive influence. It's not necessarily the shareholders themselves that are doing this. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between the fiduciary duty and this. So this kind of gets in the weeds, but the reality is, if you look at who can vote the shares, if you really want a democratic system, well, the owner of the shares would vote the shares. And one of the best things you could do is get a blockchain structure. You could even get, blockchain exchange where you're truly doing securities that way. And it'd be a different way to trade. NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange have listing requirements. A blockchain exchange could trade shares in the same way. Some companies might choose to be listed on this. That's not a new idea. It's in the space. If it was truly novel, I'd probably be like, I looked at leaving Congress in 2019 when we were going to be in the minority and saying, maybe I should just start doing a crypto startup. So I had to create a little spreadsheet to count the opportunity costs, right? I think it's an important place to be. It's important for people to come to Congress that understand and value these issues and work to advance them. And the reality is people are working on these ideas. I think they're going to get proven out in ways like that way before they're trusted by the average voter to be accessible.
Nice. Warren, what can we do as like the crypto community now? You mentioned Brad Sherman, Maxine Waters, Los Angeles. Man, we know so many people in that LA area that are like, that whole area is big time into cryptocurrency, blockchain. There's a lot of companies there too. What can we do in the US here? Like what would you recommend that we do that we can sort of get our voices out there? And what would be the most constructive thing for us to focus our energy on?
Well, I might talk about some of that in a different way. I'm sitting in my congressional office right now. And the official side is, I came from manufacturing. So you're used to shift work, first shift, second shift, third shift. Third shift's when I sleep. First shift is when I do the official job. And although these hours are normally like second shift hours, that's when you do fundraising and you do the political part. So I kind of call the fundraising and political part second shift work. So I'm going to skip any second shift answers, but I'm not going to pretend that that's not part of what happens in Congress. But you'll see there is an increased lobbying presence here. And that's as far as I'll go, here in the office. On the first shift side, look, getting on someone's calendar really is important because when something shows up on my calendar, we've got on average about a 15-person staff. Some are in your district and some are in DC here. And when you take a meeting, someone has prepped you for that meeting. If it's on a policy issue like crypto, you've got a legislative person who's done the homework. They'll put it in there. Normally, you'll not only have access to something to read, you'll have somebody that briefs you and preps you, and you go take the meeting. And how much time people spend on it's going to be variable based on their level of interest on it. And there's certainly ways to hold everyone's attention. But when you invite folks to things in their districts, in particular, Stephen Lynch is a guy in influential spot on this in Massachusetts. You look all down in our committee, not just Maxine and Brad Sherman, but if you look outside of our committee, Ro Khanna out in Silicon Valley, there are people that strategically could be invited to things just because their proximity to it. So if you've got a crypto company, and there's plenty of crypto in Ohio, invite your member of Congress and help them understand it. And if you can't get the member to come, get the staff to come, get the legislative staff in particular to come. And, a lot of these guys are, very talented folks. I mean, I'm coming from manufacturing and it's tough. It's tough to recruit talent in manufacturing. It's not the sexiest industry, but the amount of talent that wants to be part of what's going on in Capitol Hill is amazing. The wages aren't the greatest. People are looking for a break, and they come pour a lot of talent and a lot of energy into it. We've been able to hire some great people, and the young people run Capitol Hill. People say, "Oh, well, Capitol Hill's dominated by all these, middle-aged old people," the reality is the staff are 20 and 30 somethings overwhelmingly, and they do a lot of the real work on this. So if you can't get the member, get the staff, get on somebody's calendar and sit down and make sure they understand the issues.
That's great advice.
That's very, very good advice. We want to respect your time. We're actually at an hour and a little over an hour. Really, really appreciate you coming on tonight, sharing your insight. It was outstanding. We'd love to have you back on at a future date if you'd come back on again and give us any updates that are happening in
well, it's great talking with you guys. Whether I'm come on or not, it'll depend on what kind of feedback you guys get on the on this one. You have some really good ones, so it's an honor to be invited, and hope to see you in person before long. But thanks for the conversation. I really appreciate what you guys do.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Warren Davidson. What a phenomenal crusader for crypto. I mean, somebody had to take that first step. And thanks to you and your band of merry, amazing Congress people, you went in there, you're fighting there, you got, and it's really nice to see, because one of the things, you're also part of the House Freedom Caucus too. So we also have like Matt Gaetz, another representative from from Florida. We have some other folks in there like Mo Brooks and some other people, and it's amazing. It's an outstanding class of people to be part of. So thank you so much for coming on the chain, and we wish you all the best. We're behind you, so anything we can do, that Jeff and I can do, or on the chain, or anything you want to communicate to us to get out there, we're more than happy to take that challenge head on.
Well, the next panel I think I'm on, that I know anyway, that I know is on my calendar, is Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming, and I are supposed to be on a panel down in Miami. So I look forward to that, and hopefully people will keep paying attention to it. But great talking with you guys.
All right, take care. Everybody have a great one. We'll see you on the next one, Jeff.
Stanley, hang in there. Thank you.
Take care.
We're up.
Are you down with OTC? Please like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when the next video drops.